Welcome to CINEPRO, where we bring your favorite movies back to life with quick recaps, hidden details, and everything you missed. Our movie Healing Towers begins with psychiatrist Mark driving his car down the street, where he stops at a young man sleeping on the ground in a terrible state. We learn that his name is Jeremy. Mark introduces himself as a psychiatrist and tells Jeremy about his healing towers. He then takes money out of his pocket and gives it to Jeremy, telling him that in the tower he'll find a room with a bed, bathroom, and shower, and he'll live a decent life instead of sleeping on the streets like this. Although Jeremy is anxious and confused at first, the offer tempts him because he needs it, so he agrees to go with Mark. When Jeremy arrives at the tower, he is amazed by the room he will stay and the beautiful view. He finds his favorite chocolate on his nightstand and asks Mark how he knew he liked that kind. Mark tells him he knows a lot about him, more than Jeremy knows about himself. Mark says all the clothes in the room are his and points out his book, asking him to try to find time to read it as he likes his patients to read his books. As soon as Mark leaves the room, Jeremy grabs the chocolate and eats it ravenously. After a while, Jeremy is with Mark again, having showered and changed his clothes. Mark introduces him to the people in the tower: Nurse Grace, Guard Richard, and a patient named Ashley. Ashley tells Jeremy she has felt much better since coming here and hopes he will feel the same. Jeremy is surprised that they don't serve any. Ashley tells him she was shocked at first too, but Dr. Mark helped her stop eating meat with Grace's help. Grace is happy and thanks her. The next day, Jeremy is in agony because he is an addict, and Dr. Mark speaks to him through the speaker, asking him to hold on and be strong. Nurse Grace enters and gives him his medication, telling him to listen to Dr. Mark so his health improves and he recovers. Jeremy keeps holding his head from the pain. Mark speaks to him, asking what bothers him most. Jeremy replies that he's upset with his mother Rhonda and her rose-colored glasses. He explains that she always yelled at him and blamed him for his father leaving, even beating him until he bled and wishing him dead every day. At night, Jeremy is in a room called the healing room. Nurse Grace enters to give him his medication because it's time. She first gives him the chocolate he likes and tells him he will get chocolate every day if he listens and takes his medicine. Grace gives him an injection. After a while, Jeremy wakes up to Dr. Mark's voice and discovers there are speakers and cameras in his room. Mark asks if he smells roses. Jeremy remembers the red roses that John, his mother's lover, used to, and how once John broke his arm beating him, then gave his mother roses. Mark asks him to focus on the smell of the red roses to free himself from his bad memories. The next day, we see a police officer named Joe arguing with his boss, Ron, because he stole evidence from a criminal and beat. Joe says he knows the criminal knows where his missing daughter Casey is. Ron tells him they are searching for Casey and need to be patient and rational, and asks him to take a leave of absence. Joe hands over his weapon and tells Ron he can't rest until he finds his daughter. Then we see a girl named Darlene watching a video of Dr. Mark with a girl named Amanda, who is treated by him. Amanda talks about how her life changed of Mark and how she was happy and calm in his healing tower, but she doesn't remember anything about the dream therapy. She asks Mark if the dream therapy is designed so the patient doesn't remember anything about it after recovery. Mark tells her the therapy he designed is based on forgetting the trauma, so it's natural the patient remembers nothing. Darlene goes to Dr. Mark, volunteering to be part of his therapy. She signs a confidentiality agreement. Mark tells her that everything she's completely secret out of respect for the patients and the place. He gives her a pair of rose-colored glasses and asks her to wear them, telling her she will help them treat Jeremy by playing the role of Rhonda, Jeremy's mother. Later, Darlene is in the room with Jeremy, and Dr. Mark speaks to him through telling him his mother has come to see him and check on him. Jeremy gets very upset. Mark tries to calm him, telling him he's no longer a child and needs to tell his mother not to hurt him again. Jeremy breaks down, telling his mother she's a criminal who ruined his life, that he hates her and doesn't want to see her. Mark continues talking to Jeremy, telling him this is a dream now and he can do anything he wants to his mother in the dream. Jeremy decides to attack Darlene, believing she is his mother, and beats her violently. Darlene screams in pain and is shocked by what is happening, especially when Mark tells Jeremy he'll find a knife in the drawer to do what he wants to his mother. Jeremy chases Darlene as she tries to escape, but he catches her. She tries to tell him she's not his mother and that Dr. Mark is deceiving, but Mark keeps talking to Jeremy, telling him he will heal and be well when he gets everything out and takes revenge on his mother. Jeremy wounds Darlene with the knife on her head and cuts off part of her ear. Darlene tries to escape, but the door is locked. The next day, Jeremy wakes up and finds Mark waiting for him, asking if he remembers anything about his dream. Jeremy says he still remembers John's belt his mother's husband, which he... Meanwhile, we see Darlene's friend, posting on social media that Darlene is missing and she doesn't know where she is or how to reach her. Joe is in a bad state, mourning the loss of his daughter Casey, imagining her presence with him. Julia calls him, reminding him of herself and that she interviewed a year ago about his daughter's disappearance, asking if they can talk for a while. Back at Mark's healing tower, we see guard Richard dragging an unconscious girl on the ground. The girl wakes up, terrified. Richard tells her not to think about escaping again. She won't leave here until Mark heals her and allows her to go. Richard brutally gouges out the girl's eyes and puts them in a jar. At that time, Julia is with Joe, showing him a file with pictures and information about people who including Darlene and tells him she feels that their disappearance is related to each other, and Joe goes to Darlene's house. Darlene lets Julia into her room and shows her the book she's been reading all this time. It's Dr. Mark's book. Joe is surprised by the coincidence because Casey was also very fond of this doctor and read the same book, believing his words about dream therapy and how it would completely change psychiatric treatment. At that moment, Joe decides to investigate Mark and his healing towers. We see Darlene waking up and finding Nurse Grace beside her. She asks Grace to save her and help her. Suddenly, Dr. Mark enters and tells Darlene she was excellent. Darlene gets angry at him, accusing him of being crazy and a fraud who deceived, not telling her that the treatment would be this way and that she would get hurt. Darlene starts screaming loudly, but Mark laughs at her because no one will hear her. Mark goes to Ashley's room with Nurse Grace, gives Ashley her medication, and asks her to recall a sad, dark memory that troubles her. Ashley remembers Father Bob, who used to harass her every day at church, and how he convinced her family she was... When she tried to explain to her family what happened, no one believed her, especially her older sister, who always told her she ruined. Then we see Ashley in the healing room. Mark brings in a volunteer to play the role of Father Bob so that Ashley can dream and take revenge. Of course, all the volunteers have no idea what's really going to happen to them. Mark ties the volunteer to the chair and puts handcuffs on his hands. When the volunteer is surprised, Mark tells him it's for his protection, and then he and Grace leave the room. As soon as the medication starts working, Mark speaks to Ashley through the telling her that Bob is in front of her now in the dream, and she's allowed to take revenge on him in any way she wishes. The volunteer starts to worry and get scared, especially when Ashley tells him she hates him intensely. Mark tells Ashley there's something under the bed she'll need. Ashley finds an axe and decides to take revenge on Bob by cutting off the hands he used to harass her. She then brutally cuts off the volunteer's hand. The next day, Julia goes to Joe's house and sees a picture of Casey with her mother Jenny. Joe tells her Jenny died when Casey was 5 years old, and they suffered for a long time. He tried his best to hide his sadness from Casey so she wouldn't be affected even more or feel he was weak. At that moment, Joe breaks down and cries, so Julia hugs and consoles. Later, Julia is at home and opens Darlene's laptop, finding the interview with Dr. Mark that Darlene was watching. She also finds the address of the healing towers and calls Joe to tell him about her discovery. She might find Darlene there, or at least meet Dr. Mark. Julia then goes to the healing towers. Mark speaks to her through the speakers at the door, asking about the reason for her. She tells him she's looking for her friend Darlene, who might have come here and needs help from anyone who's seen her because she's missing. Mark opens the door and asks Julia to come up to his office on the 6th floor. When Julia arrives at Mark's office, she tells him Darlene is one of his biggest fans and studies mental health because she wants to work in the field. She follows him all the time and loves his opinions and ideas, so Julia thought she might find her here learning something from him. Mark tells her it's the first time he's heard that name and asks if she's reported it to the police. Julia says she hasn't gone to the police yet because she expected Darlene to return the next day. But now she's been missing for 3 days. Mark asks if she told anyone she was coming to see him. Julia is surprised by the question, but Mark then tells a story about his parents, saying they suffered a lot because of their mental illness and the treatment methods at the time were terrible and brutal. He suggests Julia join him to look through the volunteer records to see if Darlene is one of them. Julia agrees. See Mark taking Julia to Richard, telling him Julia is looking for her friend Darlene, then leaving her with Richard. Richard shows Julia an earring, and she is shocked to recognize it as Darlene's. She asks Richard if he saw Darlene, and he shows her Darlene's severed ear kept in a jar. She realizes something has happened to Darlene, hits Richard and runs away. Julia reaches a room and finds Darlene lying on the bed with handcuffs on her hands and tries to save her, but Darlene is At the same moment, Mark speaks to them through the speaker, telling them they'll stay in the tower and won't leave, then locks the door and traps them inside. At night, While Mark is sleeping, dreams of memories from his childhood when he was in the hospital watching his mother undergo electroconvulsive therapy. He entered the room and decided to kill one of the doctors with an... Mark wakes up from sleep. The next day, we see Julia tied to a chair in Mark's office, watching the dream therapy process through surveillance camera screens. At that time, Darlin and Ashley are in the healing room. Nurse Grace injects Ashley with the medication and sprays Darlin with Ashley's sister's perfume so that when Ashley wakes up and the medication takes effect, she'll think Darlin is her sister and take revenge to free herself. Ashley wakes up, and Mark speaks to her through the speaker, telling her sister is sitting in front of her now, referring to Darlin. Ashley looks at Darlin with hatred and anger. When she smells her sister's perfume, she becomes even more furious and violently pulls Darlin's hair. Mark asks Ashley to take revenge on her sister and get her rights. At that moment, Darlin pushes Ashley away with her legs, trying to defend herself. Ashley finds the axe under the bed, grabs it to attack Darlene, and manages to strike her with the axe, killing her violently. She is her sister. Meanwhile, Julia is extremely distraught, crying and telling Mark he's crazy and sick. Mark responds, telling her he's a healer and brings peace to troubled minds. Julia asks how he thinks this treatment could succeed, and Mark says he was treated with this method in the past and it worked for him. He recalls when he was a teenager and took revenge on the doctor who treated his mother, killing him with electricity just as he tortured his mother. At that time, Joe goes to Julia's house because he's been calling her and she hasn't answered, so he becomes worried. When he finds she's not home, he gets even more anxious. He sees the laptop and finds Mark's interview, remembers what Julia said, and realizes she decided to go see Dr. Mark. It's Jeremy's turn for a session. Nurse Grace enters with the medication, and with her, also, the volunteer who played the role of Bob the priest, this time will play the role of John, Jeremy's stepfather. At that moment, Mark talks to Jeremy and tells him that John is in front of him and he is allowed to take revenge on him in any way he wishes. The volunteer then begs Jeremy to let him go and swears that he is not John, just a volunteer, but Jeremy doesn't believe him. He believes Mark and continues to beat the volunteer violently. He grabs a belt, wraps it around the volunteer's neck, and chokes him out of rage and hatred until Jeremy keeps laughing hysterically. At the same time, Julia is watching what is happening on the screen and tells Mark that he is a psychopath and a criminal. Mark responds that this treatment frees people from their psychological traumas so they can leave here able to start a new life and become leaders. Through this treatment, he discovered that psychiatric patients are geniuses. At that moment, Joe calls Ron to tell him that Julia has disappeared just like his girlfriend and daughter. Ron asks him to meet him in his office in half an hour. Julia locked inside a cage, and Julia asks him to help her. Jeremy tells her he left his room without Dr. Mark's permission, and if Mark finds out, he'll punish him. Julia tries to reassure Jeremy that no one will punish him while she's with him. Jeremy asks her if she will get him the chocolate he likes. She promises to get him anything he wants if he gets her out of there. Jeremy goes to get the key, opens the cage, and frees Julia from the handcuffs, but he's afraid to escape with her and tells her he is still scared and needs treatment. Julia tells him that Dr. Mark is deceiving him to keep him here, and promises that if he escapes with her, she will get him the chocolate he loves. At that moment, Mark wakes up and sees Jeremy and Julia escaping through the surveillance cameras. He quickly goes to the tower with Richard and catches Julia calling for help. They capture her and Jeremy. Joe sits with Ron in his office, and they listen to Julia's call for help. They find out the call was very short and unfortunately couldn't trace her location. Joe says the call came from Dr. Mark's healing tower, and he can't wait for the police to act. Then we see Joe trying to sneak into Mark's healing tower and sees Richard with a girl's severed head. He threatens him with a gun and asks him to raise his hands and step aside. He asks him his name, and Richard replies that his name is the guard here. He says that the head is normal here since it's a medical facility and they need human organs for experiments, but Joe doesn't believe him. Richard gets angry and says that Joe is here without a search warrant and they have the right to prosecute him. Joe is shocked when he finds his daughter's necklace on the table and asks Richard where he got it. Richard lies and says he won it in a bet. Joe hits him to make him confess and ask where his daughter is. When Joe opens the fridge, he finds human body parts. Richard tries to lie again and says they are for Halloween. But at that moment, Mark comes in with his gun and threatens Joe to drop his weapon. Joe is forced to comply, and Richard attacks and beats him. They take Joe and Mark to the same cage where Julia is held and lock them up together. John threatens them that the police are on their way, but Mark is not scared or bothered. Then Mark and Richard go to Nurse Grace and tell her that the police may know that Joe is here. Grace is upset because new patients are coming next week, and Mark asks her and Richard to hide any evidence of Julia and Joe being here so that if the police come, they'll be safe. Grace asks what they'll do with Jeremy and Ashley since they haven't finished their treatment. Mark tells her they can't leave now and the only solution is to get rid of them. Grace is surprised by his request. Then Grace goes to Jeremy to give him an injection to end his life. Jeremy is devastated because he understands what Grace is about to do. But Grace can't kill Jeremy and backs out at the last moment. Meanwhile, Richard and Mark are with Joe and Julia, intending to kill them and get rid of them. Julia manages to attack Mark and Joe attacks Richard. Mark passes out and they tie him up and escape. Joe calls Ron to come to the tower with the police. During this time, Grace hears Mark and goes to help him. He runs to try to fix things. Grace tries to revive Richard, but suddenly Joe and Julia come in. At that moment, Joe is shocked because Grace is actually his daughter Casey, and Richard lied when he said Casey was dead and took her eyes. We then learn that Mark contacted some powerful acquaintances to help him escape the country. Later at the police station, Ron and Joe are sitting with Grace, interrogating her to find out what Mark did to her, but she insists she's Grace, not Casey, and that Mark is good and helps patients. Ron is forced to show her surveillance footage to prove that Mark brainwashed her and also harassed her while she was under the influence of drugs. She is shocked, collapses, and has seizures, and Joe is worried about her. The next day, we see Joe in the hospital with his... When she wakes up, she remembers everything and realizes she is Casey, and she cries and hugs him because she missed him so much. Joe reassures her that he is by her side and will protect her from anything. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button so you never miss an updates. See you in the next video.